Well, good morning, everybody. We're so glad you're joining us this morning for our monthly Tread Talk. We're excited to have all of you here today. Let's get to the fun stuff here, and that's the KSU Powercat Sports team. We're so excited to have them back again with us this year with their 2022-2023 Formula SAE Formula Race cars. SAE stands for Society of Automotive Engineers, and this car is named Bingle. Bingle. They name their cars every year, which I think is really cool. Anyway, Powercat Motorsports is Kansas State Society of Engineers Formula Race Team. Formula SAE is the world's largest and most prestigious design competition with 13 international competitions and over 700 active teams. Powercat Motorsports is proud to represent K-State in this competition every year since 1997. The premise of this design series is to design, manufacture, test, race, and present a fully functional open-wheeled, open cockpit race car. While housed in the Mechanical and Nuclear Engineering Department, the entirety of the work is completed by students from all across campus. Powercat Motorsports has a proud tradition of hard work, dedicated ethics, and publishing the limits in design. This can be recognized as the team features advanced technologies that compare to professional race teams. These include a full carbon fiber chassis, full aerodynamic packages, custom CNC parts, a pneumatic paddle shift system, and wireless data acquisition to monitor the car's dynamic behavior in real time. Let's give them a warm welcome. I'm going to turn it over to Tyler Weber. Tyler is the club's president this year, and I'll have him introduce himself, and then as other people, if you want to introduce them or how they want to introduce themselves. So thank you, Tyler.
Thank you for the introduction. Like you said, my name is Tyler Weber. I am the president of the Powercat Motorsports team for this year. So we will get started here. So firstly, I wanted to dive in a little bit to our team structure. So from the top down, we have the president, which is myself, and then we have the chief engineer, and then we have 8 subsystem leads that each control a specific section of the car. So we have the aerodynamic subsystem, business, chassis, drivetrain, engine, electrical, ergonomics, and suspension subsystems. So firstly, what is Formula SAE? So like you said, it is the Formula Society of Automotive Engineers. So it is a collegiate design series with over 20 international competitions, and there is over 700 internal combustion cars worldwide, and we are very fortunate to be able to compete against around 120 of them here at our competition in the US. The main premise of the competition is to really focus on the design, build, and test process, which in our case, we get to do that through building a single-seater formula-style race car like you see here.
Hi, I'm Carter Seigan. I'm the chief engineer this year, and I'll tell you a little bit about our competition structure. So our competition every year is in Michigan at the NASCAR track up there, Michigan International Speedway. We compete against 120 other teams. It's typically in May. This week it's doing finals week, so that's unfortunate timing, but at least we get to skip finals. We have to retake them though another time. So we also compete at a couple other competitions. So we compete at local SCCA competitions down in Salina sometimes. We've also been to Solo Nats before. We also host our own competition here in Manhattan every fall called Formula Wheat, where we have a lot of local Midwest teams come out like Mizzou, Nebraska, and that's a lot of fun. It's always fun to hang out with them in a more low-key environment than competition and be able to talk to them about how they designed their car and how they tackled some of the same problems that we see every year. So during the competition, we have to go through a pretty thorough technical inspection. So the rule book for these cars are over 100 pages, a lot of which is safety because these cars are built by a bunch of college students that we kind of know what we're doing, but we don't really, So they want to make sure that they're going to be safe and they aren't going to fall apart on the racetrack, and everyone wants to be make sure no one gets hurt. So it's broken down into a couple different sections. So we have the tech inspection where they make sure you pass the rule book. They have fuel/tilt. So they put your car up on that tilt stand and make sure you don't leak any fluids. We have noise to make sure we're under the noise restrictions, and then we have brakes to make sure that you can lock up all four tires. So the competition is broken down into static events and dynamic events. So the static events are cost, design, and a business presentation event. So design is really interesting because you talk to a lot of people from industry about the engineering and design behind your car. So for example, when I was at competition with this car in suspension design, my design judge was actually a Formula One engineer. So they know their stuff and they really want to get into your brain, and see what you know, why you did what you did. So really reinforces the engineering and design part of the competition. But the really fun part, in my opinion, is the dynamic events. So we have 4 different dynamic events that we compete in. Acceleration, which is a 75-meter drag race from a dig. A skid pad, which is a figure-8 barrel race. And then autocross, which is 1-lap shootout, and it also acts as a qualifying for the endurance event, which is an 11-mile race with a driver change in the middle on a coned course. Pretty fun. So some of the teams we race against, we race against a lot of pretty good teams, and they're sponsored by a lot of cool companies. So like Haas, I know some teams are sponsored by Red Bull, Hendrick Motorsports, a lot of really, really good teams out there. It's always fun to see what they bring to competition every year. So our alumni are at quite a few different companies out in the world. So we've got people at Pratt & Miller Motorsports, we have people at GM, Chrysler, a lot of people at Garmin, Spirit, now Boeing. So.
Alrighty, so a little bit of team goals and design highlights that we wanted to highlight, not just for this year, but for this car as well. So a couple of team goals: we wanted the car to weigh 475 pounds. We wanted to get 3 mock endurances in. So like Carter said, we have the endurance event at competition. So really wanted to make sure that we get a lot of time testing the car, making sure that we're not going to break things when we actually do get to competition and do the actual endurance itself. We wanted to make sure that we got the chassis done over winter break, which we were able to do with this car. And then we wanted to have the car finished by April 12th, and that April 12th date is engineering open house at K-State, and that's where we've been unveiling the car every single year. So wanting to have the car completely done driving by that date. A couple of design highlights, not just for this car, but for this year's car as well. So updating the aerodynamics package. For this car, the chassis layup was revamped. Engine weight reduction, new intake design on this car. Refined suspension with more comfort and grip. And then for this car as well, a completely reworked drivetrain system. And we'll get into that a little bit later with all the different leads. So along with being president, I am also the aerodynamics lead on the team. So my job as the aerodynamics lead is to basically handle the airflow characteristics that go over the car. So we work on really controlling that airflow in order to generate downforce, thus giving the car more tire grip and allowing us to accelerate and brake quicker, take corners quicker. So I have 4 main components on the aerodynamic subsystem. So we have the front wing assembly, the rear wing assembly, the under tray, which is like the floor that goes under the car, and then we have the side pods on both sides. So in terms of design, so I start with all of my design in SolidWorks, so really getting the CAD models for each of the different assemblies put together. And then from there, we move into flow simulation, so looking at the flow characteristics, going over each of the different assemblies. So we use SolidWorks flow simulations for that, and then we also use ANSYS. And then from there, we manufacture the entire, all the wing assemblies, so all the different carbon fiber parts, and then we validate them in real life. So one of the examples that you can kind of see for that with this car is in the bottom left-hand corner, we did like yarn testing. So we basically taped yarn on all the major areas of the aerodynamic package, and we're able to look and visualize, see, make sure that it's actually flowing good over the car, see how accurate we were in terms of our design, making sure that it actually is going to work like we thought it would. So manufacturing. So this package specifically was manufactured using wet lay carbon fiber practices. So we basically take a dry carbon fiber weave, we lay them on either MDF or foam molds, and then we roll resin onto them. And then we put them in a vacuum bag, and then we pull vacuum on the part, and then after about 24 hours or so, it cures, and then you get a solid, firm carbon fiber composite, like you see on many different components on this car. And so along with the carbon fiber parts, we use Kevlar fibers on certain sections like the bottom of the front wing, the under tray, and the end plates, parts that might scrape on the ground because we do run pretty low to the ground. So we just want to make sure that if it does scrape on the ground, it's going to handle that abrasion and not just break off. And then on other sections like the under tray and end plates and different things like that, we put honeycomb core on there. Just for sections to make them a little bit thicker, make them stiffer without having to put lots and lots of carbon fiber, make them really heavy. And if you look at some of the pictures there, so bottom left, that was the rear wing main plane, so that's that big airfoil that we have at the back there. And then we have the 2 side pods there, and that is actually on the right side, that's like the beginning of the front wing layup. And then on the far right, that's the under tray mold. So that's the big floor piece that goes underneath the car. And that's the mold that we laid up all the carbon fiber, all the core, and different pieces on. So yeah, that is all I have for aerodynamics. So I will hand it off to the chassis subsystem now.
Hello, my name is Thomas Harp. I'm filling in for our chassis lead, Wyatt Haug, who couldn't be here today. If you have any more specific questions, you can ask the camera guy over there, because he was the chassis lead for this car. But I'll try to go over what I can. So this car features a carbon fiber monocoque, fully carbon fiber layup, with a steel front hoop, which you can't see, but it's laid up inside the carbon, and a steel main hoop. It also features carbon fiber nose cone and suspension covers. Those are wet lay, not quite the same pre-preg carbon. The chassis, just the carbon monocoque, was 56 pounds coming out of the mold. We had to do some work to the mold, so it comes out. We have to sand it, prep it for a clear coat, and then do some other prep work. But then, otherwise, it's pretty much similar looking to how it comes out of the mold. The construction was varying layup, so it's pre-preg carbon, but also features core, which is sandwiched between two layers of skin and the monocoque. It enables greater design flexibility because you can model the car in CAD and decide how you want to mount your aero, and pretty much everything's designed with the chassis in mind. So a big part of running a monocoque, what makes it unique is you have to pretty much make it similar in strength. You have to equate it to a steel tube frame. So there's a whole spreadsheet called SES, very complicated. Nobody really understands it except for the guy taking pictures. But so yeah, it determines the equivalence to steel tube frame, because safety is a big thing. A lot of layup issues can happen, so you want to make sure that it's going to be structurally sound. Construction, so it's pre-preg carbon, so it's not quite the same wet layup as the aero stuff. And so the resin's infused into the carbon. You still vacuum bag it to compress the layers, but then it's cured in an autoclave. And so it's all the resin will melt and get really flowy, and then it'll cure a lot stronger. But so to lay up the chassis, there's another carbon fiber mold. So you have a plug, and then you lay up carbon around it to make the mold. And so you end up having multiple layers and different templates to fit different shapes inside the chassis. But then all the layers end up forming as one solid monocoque. But then yeah, in the pictures you can see the layers of skin, and also the honeycomb core. I don't know if you can see it that great in that picture, but you can see kind of the inside, the core, and then the adhesive that keeps the honeycomb in with the carbon fiber. Yeah, you can see the picture on the left, the different panels of the monocoque. But then also, we take it to get it cured at Wichita State. They have a big autoclave oven that fits our chassis. I'll hand it off to Drivetrain.
Yeah, hi, I'm also a Tyler on the team, and I'll talk about the drivetrain. So the drivetrain is basically transferring all the power from the engine to the wheels, so everything in between. So there's a few different components to drivetrain. The main one is going to be the differential, which splits power between the wheels. That was changed this year. And then the front and rear sprocket, half shafts, stub shafts, and then we have our differential carrier and eccentric, which allows us to tighten the chain. And then wheel hubs, wheel nuts, and then as well as the lower engine mount on this car as part of drivetrain. So some of the changes that got made to the drivetrain design for Bengal is we switched diffs. We used to run a torsion diff, and we decided to switch to a limited slip differential made by Drexler, specifically for Formula SAE. So it has a few advantages. It's 2.2 pounds lighter than our previous setup. And then it also has adjustable ramp angles, so we could change the setup for different types of events depending on what we want. And then we also optimized the final drive ratio to be more advantageous for the power band of the engine that we're running, and make it more usable. And then here are a couple other designs. On the right, you can see our sprocket design. So it used to be a solid sprocket, and then we did FEA in order to make the sprocket lighter. So it's about almost 30% lighter. So all those weight savings add up on the car. And then also the carrier design changed. I'm going to point over them. So on the previous year's car, Serval, this carrier actually failed here in buckling while we were doing a burnout. And so we added a more of a brace here, and then also mounted it to the rear face of the chassis in a different way so that it hopefully wouldn't fail again, which it didn't. So this just highlights some of the manufacturing of drivetrain. This is kind of the full assembly, or a lot of the parts of the drivetrain. We get the carrier's water jet. out of aluminum, and then they get machined for the eccentric as well. And then you can see some of the wheel hubs there as well. Yeah, that's all I have for drivetrain. It'll be electrical.
Hi, everybody. My name is Will Fulkerson, and I'm the guy who deals with all the stuff that nobody else wants to, the electricals. So, we don't really have that many main components in the electrical system. We pretty much just have the engine computer. We use a Motec M130 for that. We have the dash, which handles displaying information to the driver and a lot of the data logging so we can collect important information about the car during our races, and that's a Motec C185. We have a fuse box, which handles our power distribution and fusing in case anything goes wrong. And then the most important thing is the wiring harness, by far. Obviously, the wiring harness connects everything together. Yeah, driver controls, those are more handled by ergo, and then we also handle the battery selection with electrical. So ECU, I'm sure most of you know that ECU stands for Engine Control Unit, but our car is fully electronically fuel injected and has a full electronic ignition. All of that tuning is done by us on the team, so we actually build the car, we get the engine running, we take it to a dyno, and we do tune the car ourselves. The ECU has lots of advantages. The Motec is a really flexible platform, so it can do just about anything that we want to. And it also gives us all the information about our engine that we need. I think the Motec can actually display live representations of the amount of power and torque that the engine's making. It's an incredible system. Our dash, like I mentioned earlier, handles the data acquisition for the car, so all of the sensor values throughout the race, engine RPM, power that we're making. This car doesn't have a steering angle sensor, does it? Okay, not steering angle, but position of our shocks. Like, we can measure the ride height of the car, and all that information is recorded, and we can use all of it to make data-driven decisions about our designs for the next year. And of course, the dash also shows the driver what gear they're in. Now, the most important part of the electrical system, the part that nobody wants to deal with, is the wiring harness. Anybody can stitch together a bunch of wires and make a car run once. The real talent is making a wiring harness that starts the car twice. So, in order to do that, make the wiring harness reliable, the electrical system works a lot with how we shield the wiring. So what you could see here, layered over the top of the wiring harness is a product that Raychem makes called DR25. It's basically a really special abrasion-resistant heat shrink, so the wiring harness can rub anywhere on the car, and it's pretty good stuff. It lasts the maybe 200 miles that these cars ever make in their lifetime. In addition to shielding the outside of the wire, we also do special things with the wire inside the harness to make sure that it doesn't rub on itself and cause electrical shorts or problems. So that's what you can see here in this picture as well, where there's basically layers. It's called concentric twisting or linear twisting, depending on the method, but there's layers of interweaved wires that twist over each other. And what that means is that our harness is incredibly flexible. You can basically kink it in your hand over itself, and there's just no resistance. It can do whatever you want it to. Yeah, so the wiring harness connects all the sensors in the car, of course, the engine. We have a couple different sub-harnesses in the car. So there's one harness. It works the same way that your standard automobile does. We have a harness that connects the engine. We have a separate harness that connects all the stuff on the right side of the car, on the left side of the car, and of course, the main harness that connects everything in the middle together. Oh, that's it. I'll pass you off to engine. Thought I had more.
Hello, my name is Caleb. I am the 4th engine lead in the last year, and I'm going to be talking about this engine.
I was the last engine.
So, engine has a couple of responsibilities before you go into deciding how you want to route everything. First, you got to choose an engine, which we've been stuck with this Triumph for quite a few years now. But then we go into designing the exhaust and the intake and how the fuel system hooks up. And yeah, I'll just be describing a little bit of that. So, as I said earlier, we use a Triumph Street. We use a Daytona 675R in this car. It's an inline 3 Doesn't make 85 horsepower, probably closer to like 60 something. But yeah, it uses the reason it only makes around 65 horsepower is you gotta pull through a restrictor that's about this big, so you can't get a whole lot of air in there, which is why it's so restricted. But then we use a carbon fiber intake, routed out through a titanium exhaust system. It's also on a custom dry sump system that's pretty cool. Runs off the E85 and then the Motec. Per rules, our engine has to be limited to 710 cc's, which is why we go with the 675R, which is pretty close to our maximum. And then that just talks a little bit about our restrictions. Yeah, there's a restriction on sound too, which is why there's a big old muffler on the back. Yeah, it's got to be 103 decibels at idle, which is pretty quiet in my opinion. All right, I'm gonna give it to Ergo.
Hello, I'm Spencer Strom. I'm the ergonomics lead, and ergonomics basically touches everything that the driver would touch while they're in the car. So that covers the brakes, the shifting, the clutch, steering wheel and driver controls, as well as the pedal box and anything safety as far as the seat and the headrest and stuff like that. So to start with driver controls and safety, this can really includes anything the driver uses to operate the car. So that's our custom carbon fiber steering wheel that we use a couple of flat panels as well as custom molded grips that we've molded to somebody's hand with gloves on. So they are super comfortable in the hand and easy to control. We have our dashboard, which includes our kill switch and a few buttons for starting the car and other things like that. And then we also have a clutch. And so in this car, you only have to clutch in to get into first gear, and then everything else is actuated with the steering wheel with the paddles. As far as safety, that includes our seat, which is molded to our average driver on the team. It's been our president in the past, as well as our firewall, the seat belts that are custom made for Formula SAE applications, as well as kill switches and all the driver gear. So that's our fire suit and helmet. Our brake system, so at competition, we're required to make sure that all 4 tires lock up at once. You get up to speed and you hit the brakes, and there's a judge for each tire, and they say, yes, it passed, or no, it didn't, and you see a thumbs down and you get really sad. But when we get all 4, we get really happy. The goal is so that it also has a good driver feel, so it isn't super jumpy, but also isn't super long, as well as lightweight and reliable. Our shifting system, we want that to be fast and reliable. In the past, we've used a electric solenoid, but I don't know, 6 years ago, we probably switched to a pneumatic system that uses a softball air tank mixed with MAC valves, and it basically just kick shifts the car using air, and it's worked really well for us, especially in last year's car. Hand it off to the suspension.
I'm back. I'm most of the suspension lead along with chief engineer. So the suspension system is responsible for making sure the tire remains good contact to the ground. So we got to make sure the tire is happy because everything on the car reacts through the tire. So we got to make sure the power gets to the ground and that the aerodynamics is pushing the tire into the ground right, and trying to get as much grip out of the tire as possible because that's how the car goes fast. So another part of the suspension system that's pretty important is making sure the driver is happy because none of this really matters if no one can drive it. So if the car is undrivable and it's squirrely and it's super makes the driver feel unconfident in the car, that isn't good. So the suspension team works a lot with the drivers to make sure that the setup is right on if it understeers or if it oversteers, and making sure that the driver is happy in the car. So our suspension system is a double wishbone setup. So you can kind of see a picture of it there on how it's set up in the rear. And then we also have inboard dampers that are actuated through push rods. So a little less unsprung mass, which is good for handling and response. So here's a breakdown of all of the components that suspension is responsible for designing and manufacturing. So we've got push rods, bell cranks, uprights, mounting tabs, control arms, dampers, steering rack, and tie rods. So a lot of different components to make, and they all have to work together nicely, otherwise the car won't drive right. So it's pretty important to make sure everything is manufactured how you designed it, and then you have to kind of design it all together as one system, otherwise it might not act right together. So our design process kind of starts with the tire, because that's what's contacting the ground. So you kind of have to select your tire and go, okay, well, what tire is going to be good for the weight of the car, and what tire is lightweight and also still makes a lot of grip. And then you kind of design out from there. So like we use a software called Lotus Shark, which you can see in the top right, which is a point cloud based software, and it kind of tells you a lot of your suspension characteristics, and then you kind of design with that software, and then you move into SolidWorks and design all of the physical components in CAD, and then move into manufacturing. So we machine a lot of the parts for suspension in-house with CNC machining or some manual machining. So a lot of billet aluminum parts. So to be a suspension guy, you gotta really like machining, which I do, thankfully. So it's a lot of fun. So on the presentation, I went ahead and threw some pictures of this car at Bengal throughout its lifetime, because I thought it'd be interesting to talk about it. So this is a picture of Bengal during its first drive. So the car was far from complete in how you see it today. So there's no aero, the main hoop isn't painted, there's all kinds of little components that aren't done, but we just wanted to go out and do an initial shakedown of the car, make sure everything was working right, and then we didn't have any critical issues we needed to solve before we did the final put together of the car. So here we have a picture of the next weekend. We got a lot done in that week. The aero package was pretty much ready to be put on, so we went ahead and mounted that up and buttoned up a couple of the things. So another shakedown before we do the livery and do the final touch-up of the car. So this is about 2 or 3 weeks before competition. I would say like 2 weeks before we went to Michigan with the car. And we were doing some aerodynamics testing. So if you guys have ever seen Ford versus Ferrari like that, taped a bunch of string on it, we do that too. And then another picture of the car without the livery. I think it's cool. You can see all of the carbon fiber pretty open, and it really shows just kind of all of the components of the car, it not being covered up. And then this is a car of the car at competition in Michigan. So this is on Saturday morning before we went to the endurance event. So at competition, they have a practice pad where you can warm up and do a final shakedown before you send your car out for endurance. So this is us at the practice pad at the morning of competition, making sure Bengal's ready to rip for endurance. And then we have a video of 1 lap of the endurance track of this car at competition. So that's 1 lap of the endurance track. So that's 10. We do 10 laps of that. Each driver does 5 laps with the driver change in the middle. So pretty fun, pretty good test of the car. It doesn't necessarily seem like a like a long time if you compare it to like the Daytona 24, which was the other weekend, but only about a third of the teams make it through endurance. So these cars are pretty unreliable because they're built by students. So definitely is a pretty rough test on them. So you can go ahead and stay updated through social media with us. We post a lot on Instagram, especially when we get to testing the car here later this semester. We'll be posting a lot more. So yeah, any questions?
Who's the best driver?
So Carter, our chief engineer, is actually our main driver on the team, and then also Will. They are two autocross and endurance drivers, so they are the two best drivers on the team.
Also, that was Carter in the video driving. So.
That was Carter, yeah. Yes.
So what do you make the firewall on this year versus last year?
So the firewall is just a carbon fiber composite panel. So it's just layers of carbon fiber on one side, and then honeycomb core in the center, and then carbon fiber on the other side. Keeps heat out really well, and it's also really, really light. So.
Question. Did you change it throughout the years, or have it kept in the same?
Since we've been running a monocoque, we've kind of stuck to the carbon fiber panel for the firewall. It just fits up a little bit nicer since we have to run the hoop separately to the monocoque and actually attach it to the chassis. Whereas like if you ran like a tube frame, the main hoop is part of it. So it fits up a little bit nicer.
Yeah, also with the firewall, like we have changed it throughout the years. Like we've had different layers of carbon and different thicknesses of core and different densities of core that we have found are stiffer or lighter depending on the car and how big it needs to be. So like in general, like especially like we've had this generation of car for a couple of years now that we've been iterating on. But as we go through the different components, and this goes for pretty much every subsystem, we kind of go through and look at last year's car and go, well, what didn't work? What can we make better? What can we make lighter? And how can we make the car faster? And then we kind of iterate on that. So a lot of the manufacturing techniques and like the general gist of the design might be similar, but there's a lot of little intricate details that get changed. And we can go more into that. Yeah.
Well, kind of a follow-on on what you're talking about. When do you expect to reach perfection? Every year you build upon the previous year, and does it make it harder for you to be a club member when all that stuff has been done preceding, and yet you want to reach perfection? When will that occur?
So I think that's actually something that we've been working on this year especially, because in the past what basically happens is, well, you have 4 years in college, you work your subsystem, put all your work into the car, and then you graduate. And then what has happened in the past is not a lot of that information has been taken down. And then so basically you start from square one again. So I think the way that we're really trying to be able to keep pushing the car forward and forward and forward and better and better and better is really documenting all of our information, all of our designs, all of our manufacturing practices, so that even when this set of leads does graduate, that we can keep pushing the car forward because we have all of the information, all the things that failed, all the wrongs that happened from years past, so we can keep making the car better and better and better.
Yep. And then in terms of the perfection, that doesn't exist. I mean, even like Formula One teams are trying to find that extra, 1/100th of a second a lap. And there are teams that have definitely a way faster car than we do. But we're definitely getting closer to that. So this car, when it competed, placed the best we ever have in the team's history. So this car placed 14th out of 120 teams. And then the car after this placed 10th out of 120. And this year we're hoping for top 5 is what we're pushing for. So we're upwards trajectory right now. The last couple of years have been straight line progression. Well, maybe not straight line, but upwards. So we're working towards it. We're getting closer. About as close to perfection as we can get, I would say, is when we win Michigan. We'll probably call that, round up the 99%.
That'd be a pretty good goal for sure.
Going off the electronics in the vehicle and ECU, do you have any active telemetry or anything that's like data monitoring you can go back to later? Or is that kind of just like not an issue with this level?
So do you mean like is stuff like saved so that we can look at it later? So that's most of what we do actually. So the dash holds several gigabytes of data, and so I think it can save like something crazy, like 100 hours of runtime or crazy can be saved in the dash, and almost all the analytics that we do are after the fact. We do have a setup that's fun where we basically tape a Wi-Fi router to the top of the car, and then I like sit there on my laptop like connected to it while Carter drives around on the spillway, and I can look at stuff live, but most of what we do is after the fact.
You in the back, sir.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, who's your major professor?
Who's our major professor? So we have two advisors on the team. So we have one is named Dr. Kevin Wanklin, and then Dr. Hossein Baboli. Dr. Wanklin is more of our historical advisor at this point, so he handles more of the college sides, the upper level stuff. And then Dr. Baboli is more of our day-to-day advisor, so he's at our tech meetings working with us that way.
And what platform is your ANSYS from?
What platform is our what, sorry? ANSYS? So ANSYS is... Sorry. ANSYS is actually just the software itself. So we just, ANSYS is a big sponsor of the competition, so we can just download it onto our computers in the shop and just run it there.
So it's not hooked directly to your CAD system?
Yeah, so we can basically take SolidWorks files directly from our designs and then just upload them into ANSYS and then can just analyze it from there.
If any of you were wondering why our engine lead, Caleb, started dying laughing when ANSYS was brought up, it's because Tyler has been fighting ANSYS to get it to run properly all semester, to get all the analysis done on the car, and it's been kind of an inside joke on the team.
Yeah. It's a little bit harder than I thought it would be coming in. There's a lot of variables when it comes to it, so it's pretty complex, but we're getting her done hopefully. Yes, sir.
Yeah, aerodynamics, do you do wind tunnel testing on actual size? You have access to wind tunnel for data?
So there is some of our sponsors I know, like Wichita State at NIAR has a wind tunnel. We unfortunately haven't been able to actually get one of our full cars into a wind tunnel, but we're hoping maybe next year to start doing some scale modeling, scale model testing. We have some smaller wind tunnels actually at the university that we can do smaller models, but we unfortunately haven't been able to actually get the full car in a wind tunnel. But I'm hoping that maybe we can get that before I graduate, because that would be pretty sweet.
But follow-up, do you find, is there a substantial benefit from the aero that you got on there? Looked like you just kind of put it on there and then didn't really have a way to optimize it, you might say.
Yeah, so I would say, obviously, I'm a little biased because I am the lead of the subsystem, but I think just due to the courses that we race on, they're a lot tighter and technical, so being able to brake quicker, accelerate quicker out of corners, also keep the car more nimble and be able to corner quicker is the biggest thing for our competition, since we do race on autocross style courses. Obviously, if it was a little bit more open course, we'd have to change the aero because this is a pretty aggressive setup. So it does make quite a bit of drag, but that does come with the benefit of the downforce that we do get from it.
So even at low speeds that you're running, you get a good downforce on with this aero. I mean, you said you only go to 70 or 80 miles an hour, right?
Yeah, so that's why the wings are so big. But speaking as a driver, like I've driven the car with and without aero, like it's noticeably faster with the aero. Like you can notice that it pulls more G-force. And then looking at the data logs, we can pull almost 2G laterally with the aero. We level out about like 1.5 without it. And it's worth about a second or two on a standard FSAE course, I'd say. So it's definitely significant benefit to have it on the car for performance-wise. It's definitely maybe not the most optimized package, but we're working on that. So yeah.
I was gonna ask, going off of that, so I'm assuming that according to the rules, you're not allowed to have like an active aero unit or anything like that.
Yeah, so you can have some active components, like some teams do run DRS. I know one team especially, they had it routed all the way up to their dash, so during like endurance, they could flip the wings open. So there's technically no real rule that says you can or cannot do it. You can have it. The biggest thing when it comes to the aerodynamics rules is honestly bounding boxes. So they kind of give you boxes around the chassis for where and where you can't put things. And then from there, it's pretty open. So you can kind of do a variety of different things. Some teams run just like a front and a rear wing. Some team runs full aerodynamic setups like this. Some run DRS on the front and rear wing. So you can do a lot of different things with it. Yes, sir.
What kind of speeds is the car capable of?
So we get up to about 75, 80 on the courses we run on. The 0 to 60 for this car, I would say, is around 4 seconds. So not bad, around like your sports car level. Pretty quick for a bunch of college students, I'd say.
Yes, sir.
Question about all the molds and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you CNC machine the molds for these, or do you hand form the molds and then lay up the carbon fiber?
Yeah, so we get a lot of the really complex molds, like the floor and like the implants and stuff. We have sponsors that have CNC routers that have, because we don't really have the capabilities to do that at K-State. But so we send out our models for them, and then we get the material, they machine them for us, and then we do all the prep work and lay up ourselves. Any other questions? If you all don't have any questions, or if you do have questions later, we will be around the car answering questions for a little while. But thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the great questions and for you all being so attentive. So thank you all.
Thank you, guys.